What's going on, Babylonians? It's me, Songs of Braze, and I'm back bringing some more synced content your way. Now, today's video, we're going to be discussing the vicious cycle change that happened in the latest patch notes, which went through on the 26th of October. In case you've been living under a rock, or in case you didn't know what the vicious cycle did originally, then there is going to be a video, there is a build video that I'm going to link right here, right now, and that's going to be a card that takes you over to there. And how this one used to work was that we were firing out piercing blades. Now, these piercing blades, once they reached a certain distance, or once we reloaded our gun, they then travelled back towards our gun, and then they were able to do some return damage. Now, every single time that you duplicated the vicious cycle, this increased the amount of damage that those return blades were going to be doing. So these can go through multiple enemies as well, so that meant we can do multiple points of damage. We were able to do some nice AoE, but only if we were able to train them and only able to get them farmed in a certain location. Now, how this one now resolves instead is that we're able to see that instead of the piercing blades being on every single shot, is that the piercing blades can now penetrate enemies. Every 3 shots, a special piercing blade will fire that can return back to the weapon, and each time the weapon is reloaded, or when the piercing blades reach their maximum distance, the special piercing blades will return back to the weapon to deal damage instead. And in addition, every 4th special piercing blade will turn into a lightning ball and deal area damage on its way back, and all special piercing blades will have a chance to be able to trigger that stun effect, depending on how you've got it maxed up. Do you have it at tier 5, in which case it will have that 100% stun. Now, in terms of the stat changes, this is where the big thing kind of came in, at least for myself, is that the bullet velocity on that gun was ridiculously low. This clocked in at around about 80 meters a second, which is kind of pitiful, especially once you consider that most of the other guns that exist in this game were kind of a little bit more hit scan, at least in the ranges that you needed to be able to tackle the PvE threats. The other things that really kind of like got on my gears was things like the Grenadier and how slow that projectile seems to travel and all that. It makes it very difficult for bossing, and that was the exact same thing when it came to the vicious cycle. Well, now they've actually bumped this up. They've doubled the bullet velocity that it's got, so instead of it being at 80 meters a second, it's now up to 160 meters a second, which does feel so much better. It feels so much nicer. The problem is that I still think this is a little bit on the slow side, but that's just purely me. I mean, it might just take a little bit of getting used to. Once we've adjusted it into our gameplay, it's probably going to be absolutely fine. Now, the other stat changes that we've seen on this is that the penetration damage no longer reduces upon each successive penetration, so we're no longer punished for being able to line up bunches of enemies. We're no longer punished for being able to shoot our bullets through enemies. We're no longer punished when they come back, so we're going to be able to have that nice consistency once that damage is there, and it's going to stay up for much longer. Now, in terms of like the other stat changes, in terms of like the blades and how long they actually go for, in terms of flight time, we actually have the figures for this. They actually can travel 4.5 seconds. The flight distance is up to a maximum of 80 meters. Once it's reached 80 meters, it will then return back to ourselves. And the penetration target count, instead of it being something like 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10 in terms of like how many targets it can penetrate, it's now just a flat 20 across all levels, which means that we can penetrate 20 enemies at a time. And it doesn't mean that you have to duplicate this weapon at all. You can always do this regardless of if it's tier 0 or whether it's tier 5. So how does this translate into gameplay? Well, technically this is a nerf and a buff at the exact same time. Being that we're not going to be able to have piercing blades on every single bullet is definitely going to be a nerf. It means that we're going to have to, we've lost 2/3 of our damage output when it comes to that, but what instead we're able to do is to be able to do, the piercing blades seem to like be more consistent. The AoE effects that's going to happen on those special piercing blades in terms of like the electric orbs and all the lightning balls, these are amazing. These mean that with the vicious cycle now has a way of being able to do mobbing, which is something that the legendary guns have all been known for being able to do. The bouncer is especially useful for being able to do mobbing because of how the bullets are able to bounce around the arena. It means that you can deal with threats left and right as well as everything that you're dealing with in front of you. And then with the crescendo is just a massive blade that's able to tackle multiple threats all at the same time. The supernova is able to do AoE when it comes to its projectile. That is its main selling point. So the split ender as well is always going to be good for mobbing as well as bossing because of how the refraction kind of works. The vicious cycle was the only one that wasn't able to do any kind of form of AoE, which meant that it did suffer when it came to the mobbing category, but was especially useful for the bossing category if we were able to land those piercing blades. So sure, we have lost a little bit of our damage when it comes to the piercing side of things, so how does this play into practicality? Well, actually, I'm pleased to say that the Vicious Cycle is a decent gun. If you do manage to build around it, it's actually a decent gun for you to take into endless runs. On top of that, we also did have a brand new game mode drop to us, which is Master Ops ++, which is what's what they've titled this anyway, and the Vicious Cycle is my main go-to for that mode. Now, I will point out to you, and I will stipulate right now, that the only other gun that I do have maxed out in terms of like tier 5 is going to be Split Ender, and Split Ender was my main go-to for endless runs. It was my main thing for going for salvage runs and everything like that, and that's no longer the case when it comes to Master Ops. When it comes to Master Ops ++, the Vicious Cycle was doing so much more damage for me that it just made so much sense for me to be able to keep it. Not only is it keeping my mobility, it's also able to do insane amounts of damage, and because the targets, because they're treated as tyrants, and because they're massive targets for being able to land weak points as well as being able to hit them on the return journey, the Vicious Cycle was just so much more consistent DPS, and it also let me be able to keep my mobility so I can then start dodging some of the attacks that are coming my way. Now, am I saying that this is better than Crescendo? Well, Crescendo in terms of like knockback did receive a little bit of a nerf in terms of like how far you can push enemies back, but in terms of like damage output, the Crescendo was barely touched. So therefore, I don't think the Vicious Cycle is really currently going to be pushing for that, but I will say that it is so much better in multiple scenarios. It's pretty much better in terms of like a generic use kind of gun, rather than being a specific tyrant gun or a bossing gun. So you can actually go out and use this, especially in your endless runs, especially in your salvage runs, especially in your Master Ops. The Vicious Cycle is definitely a usable gun now, and it's definitely not going to be any more considered by the community as being trash tier. Now, the gameplay in the background is going to be showing you off an endless run that I managed to do. I managed to get to wave 13 with a couple of randoms, and we were messing about with a Crescendo build as well as an LMG build, which seemed to be a Deadly Tortoise build that someone was rocking. There was varying levels in terms of power. I do think that being able to get to wave 13-8, if I remember right, is fairly respectable for just going in with a Vicious Cycle and not actually being able to communicate with teammates. I do think that's a pretty good showing, at least for this gun in terms of its current state. I will be messing about with it, I will be testing it out with a few other red mods and seeing what I can actually get going with this. So how would I currently recommend being able to use the Vicious Cycle? How would I currently recommend taking this into an endless run? Well, my current main go-to right now is being able to use Ragnar. I would recommend using Stun and Gun because you are able to reliably do the stuns. You are able to take advantage of that, so you don't need to use weak point stun anymore. You can just use the Vicious Cycle for what it's intended for. So being able to have those low health thresholds, being able to get those one-hit kills on stun nanos, once you do get into those waves that allow it, is definitely going to be helpful. On top of that, we also have Parting Gift. Parting Gift is just great to add to the AoE. It just kind of helps out, especially with all those return bullets. I probably will be messing about with this. I might actually throw in a couple different things, but as it currently stands, Parting Gift is always a great mod for us to go for. In terms of mod 3, I do recommend something like Headhunter, something to increase the amount of damage that you can do, because not only is this going to affect the bullets or the blades that are going out, it's also going to affect everything coming back in. So things like Headhunter that increases your weak point damage is going to be huge, and it's probably going to be one of the better ones to go for. If you can get the red mod, this does take it from 20% to 22% each stack, so you will get an extra 6%, which is kind of nice, but it will help you go a little bit further. Every single point of damage is going to be bigger, and it's going to be huge and really help you out in terms of those waves. And then lastly, I am messing about with blood tax in terms of like the waves, in terms of like endless. I have seen a lot of people rocking blood tax. I managed to get a red version. This gives me even more health recovery on top of that, so I am using this, but you can equally use something like Skill Thrill if you feel like you've got enough sustain, if you feel like you can actually get blood tax in terms of like the exchange. Skill Thrill is going to help you out because that's going to increase the amount of damage going in as well as when it comes back out to yourself, so therefore Skill Thrill is definitely a great shout there. But anyway, that pretty much wraps it up on this video in terms of like the main changes behind the Vicious Cycle. I wanted to show off how it currently performs, how you can see it in an endless run, so you don't have to waste any of your runs to try and get an idea for it. You can mess about with it in other things, but this is going to be the content that you're going to want to take it into, and I do think that the Vicious Cycle is definitely worthy of being considered a legendary gun, and it's no longer trash tier. Massive thank you for making your way to the end of the video. Massive thank you to the Babylonian family, as always, for their continued support. It really does help the channel out. If you do enjoy this type of videos and you want to see more videos like synced from ourselves, then make sure to drop that like and subscribe so you can find your way back to the channel. With all that said and done, that just leaves me to say, keep yourself safe, keep yourselves well, and I'll see you all on our next video.